In 2330, a medical research facility came under sustained assault by a band of spaceborne raiders. Overwhelmed by the relentless marauders, the Freestar Collective guards broadcast a distress call. When a ship belonging to their rival, the United Colonies, dropped in, there was concern that they might be there to take advantage of the situation. The reality of what occurred would go down as one of the high points in a Cold War between the two powers. I'm the Resolute Cartographer, and this is the story of a short-lived alliance at Research Outpost U3-09. Located on the icy surface of Altair II, Research Outpost U3-09 was an astrobiological research center. Here, scientists of the Freestar Collective sought to develop medications and other chemicals from the tissues of native biological specimens. This endeavor was a continuation of the human tradition of seeking remedies from the natural world. Like their ancestors who turned willow bark into aspirin, poppies into morphine, and mold into antibiotics, the men and women who worked at U3-09 were hoping that they would develop the next great medical protocol. Procurement teams from the Outpost ventured out across Altair II, gathering specimens. Once captured, creatures like the hunting bright cage and herding sunflower filterer were deposited in one of the 4 animal pens on the south end of the compound. The research itself took place in the largest building on the property, a 4-story structure with numerous laboratories, a data center, a comm center, a security office, and a cafeteria for the Outpost's workers. Being as remote as they were, all staff lived on site in the Outpost's residential wing. Power production and likely all utility services were hosted in the remaining large structure that stood between the labs and the landing pad. The scientists of U3-09 spent their days working in the labs, eating in the cafeteria, relaxing in the lounge, playing games of toilet paper bowling, and walking the grounds of the facility. They were watched over by a small garrison of Freestar Collective forces, headed by Lieutenant Torres. Torres was fairly young and inexperienced, but he did what he could to keep up relations between his people and the people they were meant to protect. When the scientists on their walks were disturbed by the sound of gunfire coming from the shooting range, the lieutenant ordered his people to stop their target practice. This concession to those he protected would in retrospect look like a poor choice, as Research Outpost U3-09 soon came under sustained assault by an army of spacers. As unaligned violent outsiders, spacers were looked down on by members of the major factions of the settled systems. The Altair system had had a spacer problem for some time, and in recent months they had gotten better organized. It was getting to the point that there were fears that they might be trying to take over the system. Prior to this, spacers would assault an outpost controlled by the UC or the FC, and would flee back into space when the cavalry arrived. They occasionally attacked for no reason other than to cause chaos, including one case in which they pointlessly shot down a shuttle carrying arthropods to U3-09. This time though, when the spacers came, they didn't run. When it became clear that the defenders weren't going to be able to dislodge them, and the attackers weren't going to retreat, the outpost forces began to broadcast a distress call, pleading for aid. After hours without any response, the defenders watched with dread as a United Colonies ship dropped off a load of their Marines. The United Colonies and the Freestar Collective were not on the best of terms. Founded in 2159, the United Colonies was created to organize humanity's flight from Earth and the establishment of our species' first colonies outside the Sol system. 2 years later, the UC issued the Centaurus Proclamation, granting any of their citizens the right to colonize unsettled worlds and form independent powers. 6 years later, Solomon Coe, frustrated with the bureaucratic nature of the UC, left their territory behind and headed for the Cheyenne system. It was there in 2167 that he founded the settlement Aquila City on the planet Aquila. 21 years later, Coe invited the denizens of the Voli system to join their colonies to his, and the following year the Freestar Collective became the first true power to rival the United Colonies. Ever since that time, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective have butted heads. The general animosity between these factions erupted into all-out war on 2 separate occasions, the Narian War from 2196 to 2216, and the Colony War from 2307 to 2311. By the time of our story in 2330, the enmity between the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective remained high. Thus, when the Freestar Collective forces at Research Outpost U3-09 saw the United Colonies Marines dropping in behind the spacers, there were fears that they were there to finish the job. Fortunately for Lieutenant Torres and his defenders, they were there to help. At the head of this force was Captain Myong, one of the most respected members of the UC Marines. In the Colony War, she had earned the nom de guerre the Shield of Partic Pass when she held the eponymous pass for a week against the Freestar Collective's best combat mechs. Thanks to repeated spacer attacks on a United Colonies refueling depot, she and her Marines had been deployed to the Altair system. She had listened to the distress call for hours before she couldn't take it anymore, and she brought her forces to help. Should someone higher up the chain complain, she would claim that her mandate was to combat spacers in the Altair system, and U-3-09 was in the Altair system. Despite her celebrity soldier status, she had remained a captain most of her career, thanks to her tendency to follow her moral compass, regardless of the orders from command. The fact that this outpost was under the control of the Freestar Collective wasn't going to stop her from aiding honorable Groundpounders in a fight against a bunch of spacers. Though some of her subordinates disagreed with going to help the FC, and some of Lieutenant Torres's people disagreed with accepting help from the UC, the two commanders agreed to work together to hold off the spacers. The combined forces established a defensive plan for the facility that had Torres's people hold the front door, while Myong's Marines held the rear. The defenses had been replenished, but the numerically superior waves of attackers kept coming. In the comm center, an infirmary was established to treat the wounded from both the UC and the FC. Marine medic Corporal Lazama headed this effort. As though the facility was home to many doctors, few were of the medical variety. In the security office, Freestar Collective Private Mahoney relayed Lieutenant Torres's orders to the remaining Freestar forces and continued to broadcast a distress call until the spacers broke through the front door, that was. Having crushed the defenders at the front door, the spacers swept into the facility, gunning down the few defenders inside. In the security station, Private Mahoney managed to make a break for a basement closet just before Lieutenant Torres triggered a security lockdown. Despite the lockdown sealing several doors inside the facility and recently erected barricades blocking many of the other passages, the spacers moved quickly through the outpost. Those who were caught outside of 3 locked down high security areas were quickly overwhelmed. The spacers executed dozens of helpless, unarmed scientists. With the few remaining defenders locked away behind security doors, the spacers grabbed their torches and began to cut their way in. With their victory seemingly less than an hour away, a dozen spacers headed outside to explore their newly gained outpost. As they inspected the site, a sonic boom led them to cast their sights skyward, and they watched warily as an unknown ship dropped to the landing pad. The ship the spacers saw lowering its bay door was the Constellation ship Frontier, which had just arrived to survey the Altair system when they heard Private Mahoney's broadcast. The spacers readied themselves for battle and ran to confront the newcomers. Having grown accustomed to combat through numerous encounters with the likes of these spacers, the captain of the Frontier and their crew laid waste to the spacer greeting party. With the exterior secured, they entered the same front doors the spacers had taken from the site's defenders less than an hour before. In the basement, they met Private Mahoney, who was happy to see them even if she'd been hoping for a larger force. She explained the situation at the outpost, and most significantly, that the infirmary set up in the comm center was likely to fall to the spacers in short order. With that, the crew of the Frontier pushed into the outpost, fighting the dozens of spacers inside. Rising out of the basement, the crew found the massacre the spacers had perpetrated in the cafeteria. Across from this horror show, they found the thankfully still sealed comms room. With the spacers in the area slain, the crew of the Frontier entered the makeshift infirmary and met Corporal Lazama. The corporal praised their efforts and those of Private Mahoney. When questioned about his patients, Lazama claimed that, though wounded, the researchers and soldiers in the infirmary were likely to survive, so long as the facility didn't fall completely. Along with this, he introduced them to Dr. Adamao Masua, the head of research and the only scientist who was physically unscathed. Though Dr. Masua was understandably upset, he managed to calmly explain the purpose of the facility and express his incredulity at the spacer assault. In his mind, the outpost's purpose, trying to find the next penicillin, should have spared them becoming a target. They didn't even work on military technology, so there was nothing that they were developing that would be of any immediate use to the spacers. Regardless of this, Corporal Lazama provided the captain of the Frontier with a key to some of the doors and directed them to the upper level, where Lieutenant Torres was held up. Passing through formerly locked doors, the crew of the Frontier pushed their way through more spacers, eventually finding a group of them that were attempting to cut their way into the head researcher's office. After taking these attackers out, they opened the door to the office with a new key and met Lieutenant Torres and his subordinate, Sergeant Desari. The lieutenant and the sergeant were happy to meet their rescuers, and amazed to see that there had only been 2 of them. Lieutenant Torres told the captain of the Frontier that they needed to get down to the office in which Captain Myong was held up. Despite Sergeant Desari's objections to assisting United Colonies forces before protecting their own, Torres wasn't going to let Myong take on the spacers alone, not after she had come to their aid. The four of them, now armed with Torres's security override card, went a level down and took out another crew of spacers attempting to cut their way into the office in which Captain Myong was sealed. They entered the room, but before they could be properly introduced, a second team of spacers cut their way into the back door of the facility and burst into the office from the outside. After a quick battle, the facility was once again in the hands of the defenders, thanks to Constellation. Captain Myong and her subordinate, Private Sai, greeted the newcomers and thanked them for their assistance. The captain was glad that the Frontier arrived, if for no other reason than that its presence was keeping the spacers from dropping in on top of them directly. Despite this minor reprieve, she feared that they would simply drop their forces a short distance away and keep on coming. Though the captain wanted to take the fight to the spacers to prevent another assault on the outpost, Lieutenant Torres interjected that he still had researchers and militia in the field. As they had no ships of their own, the defenders requested that the Frontier see to this issue. Agreeing to help, the crew of the Frontier left Research Outpost U-3-09 behind and made their way to the satellite research camp. Not wanting the ship to come under fire on arrival, the Frontier dropped about a half a kilometer from the camp, and the captain and their companion made their way to the camp on foot. After eliminating the half-dozen attacking spacers, the captain of the Frontier found that only a single member of the militia and one botanist remained from the spacer assault on the camp. They had been warned about the assault and had retreated into the camp's only structure before the spacers had arrived. Despite this, they had themselves faced waves of attacks and had been whittled down to this sorry state. Shaken as they were by the attack, the survivors were happy to see their rescuers and explained that they'd known they were coming thanks to a call from Private Mahoney. The crew of the Frontier departed the camp with the knowledge that the two they had saved were heading to the temporary safety of a nearby cave where they could wait for pickup. Upon their return to Research Outpost U-3-09, the Frontier was greeted at the landing pad by Captain Myong and Lieutenant Torres. Captain Myong explained her plan. The spacers were able to maintain this assault because they had a small fleet of ships that was ferrying more ground forces in from other outposts of theirs in the system. She requested that the captain of the Frontier destroy that fleet, cutting off their reinforcements. With that, the Frontier headed once more for orbit, and made their way to the spacer ship squadrons looming above Altair I and V. After eliminating these ships in a pair of space battles, the Frontier returned to Altair II and Research Outpost U-3-09. Upon their arrival, the crew of the Frontier found that additional spacers had dropped in their absence. As they joined the defenders in eliminating these attackers, another spacer ship dropped in, bringing reinforcements to the fight. After eliminating these attackers and one final shipload of spacers, the battle for Research Outpost U-3-09 ended. With the facility secure once more and the spacer assault crushed, the mixed party of victors came together one last time. Lieutenant Torres stated that he wanted to recommend Captain Myong for a Freestar Collective medal, a suggestion she enjoyed but requested that he not do so. Compared with all she had done at U-3-09, getting a commendation from the FC would be true cause for a court-martial. Captain Myong advised the lieutenant to always follow the most moral path, even if it conflicted with orders, as it was better to be able to live with oneself than to be promoted. With playful claims from the captain and the lieutenant of besting each other on some future battlefield, the factions split once more and went their separate ways. In the end, Captain Myong and Lieutenant Torres had taught their subordinates that the world wasn't so black and white. There were honorable men and women on both sides, and at least sometimes they could put aside their prejudices and fight for the common good. Not long after departing Altair II, the Frontier found itself in orbit above the world once more. They were hailed by a United Colonies ship, and in short order they were greeted by Captain Myong and Private Sai. Myong related all she knew of what had occurred in the aftermath of the battle on the planet below. The UC had tacitly approved of the engagement by calling it a training exercise and had not put her crew through a court-martial. Along with this, the Freestar Collective had promoted Lieutenant Torres to captain in recognition of his performance on Altair II. Captain Myong thanked the captain of the Frontier for their help with a gift before her ship jumped from the system. Hoping to check in on the facility and see how Dr. Masua was faring in the aftermath of the spacer assault, the Frontier headed down to the surface. Here, they found that spacers now held the former research outpost. After eliminating those who stood guard outside, the crew of the Frontier entered the facility and found more of them within. From the appearance of the station, it seemed that the Freestar Collective had gathered the remains of their science team and cut their losses at the site. This wasn't altogether unexpected, as almost the entire original team was dead, but it was disappointing to discover that in the end the spacers had won their prize. Alright, I think that'll do it for the narrative of Research Outpost U-3-09, but before closing things out I have some notes. First, I want to make it clear that the exact length of the spacer attack and the time between when the spacers effectively seized the facility and when the Frontier arrived is not stated. When I said that the Frontier had arrived less than an hour after the spacers broke in, this is my guess, because they were still attempting to cut into the security areas. It's entirely possible that the spacers attempted to wait out the defenders for a time before eventually bringing the torches in. The more likely scenario is that they brought the torches with them and wanted to be done with this as quickly as possible to take the site before reinforcements arrived. Second, why did Captain Myong not have access to the ship that dropped her and her Marines off at Research Outpost U-3-09? When she needs the captain of the Frontier to rescue people under assault at the research camp and attack the spacers above Altair 1 and 5, she says that they don't have a ship available. She doesn't say that their ship was shot down or is in some other way non-functional, so the only thing I can assume is that she wasn't allowed to use it for this purpose. It's odd as they are in the system to fight spacers, but I suppose I understand her not wanting to get the crew of the ship that dropped her off in any more trouble with Mast than they already would be. Third, Altair is not the only star system the spacers are attempting to seize. The next Starfield lore video I produce will cover another operation of theirs in the Tau Ceti system. While there are communiques indicating that neither the Freestar Collective nor the United Colonies care about their abandoned Colony War era facilities, I can't say I understand the spacers' recent attempts to capture sites that are currently occupied by the Big Two. Though there are obviously risks involved with attempting to take sites from the Ecliptic Mercs, the Crimson Fleet, and House of Haroon, I must imagine attacking either the Freestar Collective or the United Colonies would usually be far riskier. Obviously, in this case, the Freestar Collective didn't come in to aid their outpost, but they have responded in the past. As an aside, it could be that the Rangers didn't respond to Lieutenant Torres's request for reinforcements because they're currently understaffed, and they may just not have had the resources to deal with every threat. Anyway though, what exactly the spacers are looking to do when they take these systems, I don't know. It would be interesting to see a new faction form, but for now we're just dealing with organized raids. Fourth, there are things about the barricading at U-3-09 that don't make any sense. The utility structure's only exterior door is barricaded from the outside. Why? If the defenders wanted to block this entrance, they would have done so from the inside, and the attackers would have had no reason to barricade it. They'd be looking for any entrance they could find. As for the residential section, the only apparent entrance to this area is from the interior of the main building. Again, why would this be barricaded from the outside of the residential section? I thought maybe there was a breach in the wall of the residential section that the spacers had made their way in, and the door was barricaded to keep them out of the main structure, but this was not the case. The walls of the residential section are completely intact. The only answer that comes to mind is that the defenders feared a breach and they were acting preventatively. Fifth, though its practical use was years away, the researchers of U-3-09 do appear to have been tracking a potential medical breakthrough. Dr. Masua believed that a substance they codenamed X09 had the potential to one day allow humans to regrow limbs. The wording of the slate mentioning it is odd, so that's about as much as I can say for certain on that. Sixth, I wonder if Captain Myong was able to get away with her assistance to the Freestar Collective because of her fame. What I mean here is that she brought her forces to defend an outpost of the enemy and lost a lot of them in the process. There is some benefit to the UC here, in that the spacer activity in the Altair system would likely be reduced for some time following their losses at U-3-09. But it was nevertheless an action that benefited the FC more than the UC. I must question that if Captain Myong wasn't the shield of Parduk Pass, would she have been given the same treatment by Mast? I hope that there's enough humanitarianism within the UC leadership to view this as a positive action, regardless of those who have benefited most, but I don't know. Seventh, I'm fairly sure that Dr. Masua was doing something illegal. I base this on the fact that his office has an unexplained stack of cred sticks and an illegal case of harvested organs hidden from view. His demeanor and apparent worldview don't really match this, so it may be a coincidence. Eighth, this site has a wealth of resources, from the handful of solid storage containers to the well-stocked warehouses on the landing pad. Don't forget to check these if you stop by. Lastly, I experienced a bug while filming the site that I'm sure isn't specific to Research Outpost U-3-09, but as it did happen here, I'll mention it. I had returned to the facility, killed the spacers, and was exploring the interior and exterior, filming shots over a series of in-game days. As I was going over the exterior of the residential section again to ensure that there really wasn't any way in, I suddenly found myself under fire from a collection of naked spacers. They respawned and didn't bother to equip their armor. It's not that they didn't have spacesuits. After the fight I checked their inventories. They just didn't equip them. It was funny, so I thought I'd share it. Anyway, I think that'll do it for the story of the brief alliance at Research Outpost U-3-09. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. If you're interested in discussing Fallout and Starfield lore, want announcements on upcoming content, would like to vote on the next lore video, or make requests, come on by. I've started streaming every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, and Ahotep for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.